أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Today we'll be looking at the Wisconsin card sorting test again by virtue of the fact that it's one of those well-known paradigms that study cognition, cognitive drift, cognitive shifting, decision making at a very simplistic yet computational level. So I'm going to look into that. So yeah, so as you can see on the screen, which I will show you in a second. Bismillah. Okay, so the Wisconsin card sorting task. Participants are required to sort a deck of cards by matching each card against one of the four target cards based on feedback correct and incorrect after each card. Cards show one of four shapes, in one of four colors, in one of four numerosities. Numerosities is the cognitive ability to understand numbers, and from that understanding, you can build rules, you can understand game theory, so on and so forth, right? After n consecutive correct sorts, the experimenter changes the sorting criterion without warning the participant. Many potential dependent measures, right? So cards sorted correctly, categories achieved. So there seems to be a category when it comes to decision making. For instance, if you're an athlete and you're looking to essentially achieve scoring a goal in a football match, you're going to categorize scoring a goal with ball possession. And then you're going to categorize ball possession with winning possession. And you will categorize winning possession either with defending or attacking. And then you will then classify attacking or defending within a formation in football. For example, 3-4-3, 4-4-2, 4-3-2-1, 4-2-1-2, so on and so forth. So here, simply speaking, category is either shape, color, form, and number. So shape and form could be the same, mind you. So shape or form, color, and number. Preservative errors. So these are errors caused by once a stimuli, once the stimuli have passed by, you're again looking and reacting in a way that you must with the stimuli. For example, if I show you a scary video and it's there for 10 seconds, you're frightened, but 60 seconds after showing that video, you're still terrified, assuming you're a normal individual, you're not suffering from anxiety, for example, or even some form of personality disorder. That's a cognitive error known as preservative error. Next is set loss errors. So these are errors where once you understand the rule and you're having a correct result, you're still going with the wrong option. And once the wrong rule has been understood to not give the desired goal, you're still doing that despite knowing the one that helps you achieve the goal. So, a plethora, a large portion of cognitive neuroscience is covered just within this one simple task. Yesterday, we discussed the history. So, yeah, so this is the experiment. You have these cards, as you can see, and the concept is quite straightforward. You have these three green circles, you have the two squares here, the triangle here, the three plus icons in yellow here, and then you have four blue circles. Now, this is the rule. Please match the card below to one of the target cards So the target cards could either be this because it's the same color, it could be this because it's the same number, or it could be this because it's the same shape. So you're playing with three categories here. This is just to throw one off. This may or may not be, right? So which one would you go with personally? Now, that would be incorrect. I'll explain why in a second. Please match the card below with one of the targets above. Now you have maybe this, maybe this, maybe this. That's correct. Because here we're looking at the quantity. Here is not quantity. So now the rule's been established. The quantity is of concern, not the color. So this would go with this. This is with this. Now, again, it's the same card. Sorry. Yeah, so next card. Where will this one go? So this would be here. And the idea is that all of these cards would be rearranged in a manner where you'll be learning how to pick up rules and then learn those rules. So for example, if I say to you, what is wrong in 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, you would say, oh, there's number 5 missing. Well, that idea of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that rule, that sequence is implicit learning, which means that something that is innate has allowed you to understand the rule. Explicit learning, on the other hand, is, for example, learning how to play a sport. That's explicit learning. No one intrinsically, innately knows how to kick a ball in a football match or knows how to defend as a defender or be a goalkeeper or striker, so on and so forth. Right? So, again, we went through the history yesterday. I'm not going to bore you with that. So, we went through this 3 days last week on Thursday, but I'll cover it very quickly here. So, you have frontal lobes, which is, in a sense, the prefrontal cortex that's been spoken about here in particular. Milner in 1963, he did various clinical neuropsychological studies looking at the difference of errors and what percentage of the patients that were studied understood a rule and what percentage committed errors, right? Next, you had Stuss, who many decades later studied in a similar manner preservative and set loss errors. So they had some other differences in the frontal lobe as well. You have to understand that the frontal lobe has been the key driving force behind creating this particular task. Next, you have Miyake. They studied individual differences because one of the biggest limitations of the Wisconsin card sorting test is that there are limitations when it comes to each individual. For example, I might be very adept, I might be very skilled in linguistics and grammar compared to numerosities, as in understanding numbers. Now, I may perform really well on a task where, for example, let's say if this was the letter S and this was a letter S the other way, and matching it with different alphabets, I may succeed in that, but numbers and colors I have an issue with. So one of the key criticisms that Miyake highlights is that individual differences is extremely important. It's very difficult to really pinpoint individual performance because one of the critiques, as we looked at by Rick Cooper, his paper from 2024, he was looking at a slightly different model, a modern version of this, but it still applies here that it's very difficult to classify this as a competence test. This is more of a performance test. As I mentioned a few days ago, you can be competent and perform well, but being competent takes precedence over performance because performance can be very, pardon me, performance can be varied with the situation and the pressure you're under. Whereas when it comes to competence, this is something that you train yourself in. For example, language, logic, mathematics, science, reading, the Quran, any other difficult subject for the average person that requires competence. Yes, you can, for example, recite the Quran and verses of the Quran. That's, in a sense, a performance paradigm. Also, there's an element of competence, but the competence aspect would be, for example, someone who's reciting the Quran with the correct rules when it comes to the recitation, and they understand the grammar, and they also understand the sequence of these verses that they're reciting. So that's essentially what's being addressed here, that when it comes to errors in using old rules that work or don't work, th- they aren't necessarily related to set shifting efficiency. So set shifting means that when you adapt to the new rule. So for example, the rule could be here color, 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 and then all of a sudden on the sixth try it's flipped to numbers, 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 then all of a sudden it's flipped to shape, 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 shape. So this is quite common in mobile games as well, like Candy Crush and so on. It's again, those type of games are based off of cognitive neuroscientific studies, believe it or not. So relevance of set loss errors, set loss and preservative errors dissociate, propensity to set loss errors increase with age. This is again a claim by Rick Cooper that as one ages, you're more likely to commit an error where rules are hard to keep in mind when moving to the next task. So that moment, the temporal shifting, as you would call it, becomes very difficult to grasp as you age. Again, it depends. There's many ways of improving memory and retention of your cognitive abilities. One of them is having a herbal diet, ashwagandha, for example, black seed honey, and avoiding processed foods. Another one is obviously exercise. Another one is being close to Allah and knowing that you have next to no control over this world. But generally, with this test, I kind of agree to the degree where, as one ages, it becomes difficult. There is an element of patience to this as well, mind you. So, this is now looking at the most textbook computational neuroscience idea of rule based thinking and reasoning when it comes to machine and touches into machine learning. So, Dehaene and Shengua, a hierarchy of machines, assume rule change only occurs following negative feedback. So what that means is one has to change their strategy once they get negative feedback in any task, in particular this one, which I'll explain in a moment here. Assume feedback reward is ignored with probability P. So the probability of positive feedback over positive reward, that probability is, according to them, ignored for the meantime, because the idea is to achieve the goal. That's what I've gathered. 6 ways of choosing a new rule. Number one, select entirely at random. So repertoire of possible rules. So a bank, a collection of rules. You pick a rule and then you reject it. Pick one new, pick one new. So this is, in a sense, what you can say is cognitive chaos at this moment. So boxes 2 to 5. Now using local context, memory, or reasoning to eliminate rules. Now here, for example, in let me just zoom in here. In box number 2, you have the random selection, but you have context now. Context is what? This is to be categorized, this dark circle here, or let's say ball. This ball with 4 squares is the one that's chosen at random. Now, random plus memory. Memory of rejected rules. So now the rule that has to be rejected, as in, for example, the rule is not shape, it's color. For example, you're gonna remove that. So imagine a deletable archive in that particular moment when you're establishing a rule or a rule is to be established. Number four, reasoning no memory. Rules eliminated by reasoning. So rules eliminated by reasoning. So now you're compartmentalizing. You can see this separation here is being compartmentalized. So it's not being rejected. It's being stored to one area, possibly through the central executive, as we discussed yesterday. Number five is reasoning and memory. So what's happened now? You're compartmentalizing and also rejecting. Okay. Six is use both positive and negative feedback on each trial to reason optimally. So now, at the moment, the valid rule is this one. You've either rejected some or you've eliminated some. So that's the situation. So it's for example the mathematical rule known as the process of elimination in its simplest term, which means the common denominators are picked out, you settle on the commonalities, and then you work on them and you put to the side what's not valid and you reject all that you reject all of that that isn't objective, for example. And this actually reminded me of an ayah of the Quran where Allah calls the people of the book to come together on common terms, right? I'll quickly share that verse here. Oops. So go here. Just bring it up. Here we go. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is something that just reminded me of what we've just been looking at. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل يا أهل الكتاب تعالوا إلى كلمات سواء بيننا وبينكم ألا نعبد إلا الله ولا نشرك به شيء ولا يتخذ بعضنا بعضا أربابا من دون الله فإن تولوا فقولوا فقولوا اشهدوا بأننا مسلمون. Say, O people of the book, come to common terms as between us and you, that we worship none but Allah, that we associate no partners with Him, that we erect not from among ourselves lords and patrons other than Allah. If they turn back, say ye, bear witness that we at least are Muslims bowing to Allah's will. Just something that popped in my mind. The relevance, the relation, I can't really say at this point. Right, so in a nutshell, this is what this paradigm is trying to explain to us. Now, something just very basic as getting rid of or keeping in mind certain rules and putting at the forefront a rule. It seems like a very straightforward thing, but actually computationally it's very expensive, as in it takes a lot of breaking down and inductive reasoning to really come to this conclusion. So, next we have from the same authors model architecture. So, one of the key things apart from the hippocampus playing a role in this whole paradigm, and of course the dopaminergic circles and the cholinergic activation, which we looked at 2 days ago. This is looking at how reward seems to be something that allows the mind to accept a rule and use that in normal people when coming across these certain tasks. So, for instance, we'll look at this, right? Model architecture. Functional task analysis isolates three components. Number one, rapid rule change following negative reward. So, I think that is something very natural. When we come across something negative, we want to get rid of it ASAP. An annoying phone call, a bad message, a terrible film or video. If you watch films, by the way, you need to really sort your life out. But in any case, you want to get rid of it ASAP, right? Number two, ability to memorize previously tested rules. So the idea of stored memory and then using that memorized rule in real time. That's known as working memory science. Okay. Ability to reason and reject some rules a priori. A priori means before in Latin. It's a philosophical term, meaning that which was before. So reason and reject some rules. Again, this ties into philosophy because what's happening here is reason is very hard to define, whereas rejection is fairly more easier. Is but the precursor for rejecting something is reasoning. Same with acceptance. The precursor is reasoning. So how do you define that? How do you outline that? That's another weakness of this whole thing. Next is competition within each input cluster. What's the input cluster? Is these small clear circles that you see that are interconnected. This again is connected with something called connectionism. We looked at this a few weeks ago. It's on my live stream playlist. The idea is that what's there's an input layer, a hidden layer, and an output layer. Work by I think it was McClelland and Rumelhart that we looked at, who also proposed receptive fields. So it's very contentious. There's no right or wrong. It's all theoretical, and the race is essentially the one that can get their theory the most accepted. As Elliot Sober states in his book that I showed yesterday, just because a paradigm works doesn't mean it's true. It just means it's likely to produce the results that you're hoping it matches with your hypothesis and then developed into a theory. Output, pardon me, competition between intention units. So this would be here, current intention. And then output is gated by a go unit. So go is where before an output is done, an action is done, a motivation is created, an emotion is expressed. There apparently is a gate that that first of all has to allow the output to be played. Is there a filter? Is there a natural law that discriminates the intention? We don't know. And subhanallah, in Islam, how many times have we heard when it comes to niyyah, your intention of something? This is exactly what this is because rule coding units gate memory to intention links. What does that mean? Because as you can see, her rule coding units are these circles that are more, as you can see, tightly gripped with reward and error clusters. So as humans, we are always prone to error. Generally speaking, there's a 5% chance of things not happening. That's just a general percentage. A bunch of statisticians came in a room and decided that. Again, we're not going to go into the problem of p-value, although Goodman wrote an interesting paper on this. But what at the moment we're simply looking at these units that are linking intention links and memory together. So once you've coded a rule, these clear circles, now it's stored in your memory, which are all these various lines you can see. So all of this is now connected with the auto evaluation loop, which is, for lack of a better phrase, your mind doing the same thing again and again. Is it reflex? Is it procedural? Is it habitual? It could be any one of those, in my view. But it's an auto evaluation loop. You're evaluating the choice you made, what you're about to do. There's constant evaluation. Now, if this doesn't exist, for example, this whole thing fails because this is closely related to this. In order to, for example, know that 1 plus 1 is 2, you have to see it play out. So, in order to play it out, you have to work it out. So, auto evaluation is that 1 plus 1 is 2. And then rule code clusters are one that cements this rule to be true. It becomes a fact. So, from knowledge, it's now a fact. So, this is what's happening here, in my view. And then at the end, obviously, you have input. As I mentioned earlier, color, form, or number. These are three categories you're working with. Now, your mind now recognizes in its memory, let's call it for now, your working memory. You now know color, form, number. One of these three categories has to be chosen. And then the output is connected, obviously, from the memory to the current intention you have in terms of deciding which one it is. So, yes, this is complicated. It's supposed to be complicated because neuroscientists don't like to keep things very simple. Otherwise, how on earth are they going to make money and rule the world through technology and AI? Just the reality. Error inhibits the current rule. So, if there's an error, obviously, none of this works. You're still stuck here. So you're going back in. So once you're here, you're going around here. So this arrow, this here, here, here. So you're stuck here. You're not even going down. Generator of diversity proposes alternative rules. Right. So operation of the model. Note activation of an output unit rises when the go signal occurs. So I'm not entirely sure how this was measured, but it seems that once you have the intention to go, output is highest. I think that is common sense. When you intend to do something, it naturally will move a muscle or do something about it. Negative reward subsequently suppresses the number. The color rule then emerges as a plausible option for the next trial. So it seems on average that the number rule was the one that people went for first, and then after that they went for the color rule. Key results. The random model provides baseline estimates for all dependent measures. Auto-evaluation and memory results in fast rule acquisition and no preservation. Lesioning the reward network impairs learning and results in preservation. Lesioning the rule code network impairs learning more but results in fewer preservations. Oops. So this is just a bar chart outlining the idea here. So A is doing random rules. So obviously there's going to be high level of errors, as you can see here. Preservation is the error rate we can see is quite high. Black is lesion reward network, and C plus lesion net reward network, C plus rule code, and M. C is sequential trial. Right. Okay. So what's being said here is that random selection, random plus context, random and memory, auto evaluation. So participants didn't even remember what the rule was. Then auto evaluation plus memory, and then lesion reward network, and then lesion rule coding network. So it seemed that the slowest was the rule coding network. This impaired learning, the speed of how quickly one was able to learn. Lesion, which means basically damage. The ability is damaged because the patients had some issues in their brain. See, they were comparing normal people, as in those with no brain issues, with those with brain issues. Next, you have single trial. So they did one trial and they learned instantly. So it seemed those with brain lesion rule issue, rule coding, pardon me, those with lesion coding network were quite bad on the first trial. Pardon me, single trial, which is, I believe, you're looking at 40 or 60 cards being played here. So the functional analysis of the task is an important contribution of the work. While the model might appear ad hoc or overly task specific, DNC provide support for each neural level support for each component of the model. Inhibition and competition result in the auto evaluation network acting as a generator of diversity. Principles such as competition with subsets of units are shared with example given Cohen's Stroop model and are now standard in interactive activation competition IAC networks. The model is not applied to any quantitative data. When lesioning, the model supports the view that frontal behavior results from impairment in the reward network. So let's quickly look at what's being said here because I cannot recall what this is. Interactive activation and competition. So let's quickly go here. Bismillah. Yeah, it's exactly what I was talking about earlier. Rumelhart and Cleveland. Okay, so source. Let's look at this for now because exploration and parallel distributed processing and problem exercise. See, this is a MATLAB tutorial. Right, so let's quickly get here. So where did it go? Interactive activation competition networks. Yeah, as I mentioned McClelland earlier and Rumelhart, they put this idea forward, but I wasn't familiar. This is another network they built, well, theorized. IAC are artificial neural networks used to model memory and intuitive generalizations. They are made up of nodes or artificial neurons which are arrayed and activated in ways that emulate the behaviors of human memory. The IAC model is used by the parallel distributed processing group and is associated with McClelland and Rumelhart. It is described in detail in the book. The model does not contradict any currently known biological data or theories, and its performance is close enough to human performance as to warrant further investigation. Interesting. So, how can it not contradict? Surely there's limitations. The IAC approach. Bluebird, Robin, Rupert, all of them avian persuasion. Right, let's kind of zoom in here. Formally, an AIC model is a network of neurons which contains the competitive pools of mutually inhibitory neurons. One effect of this is the activation of a neuron in any pool inhibits or decreases the activation levels of any other neuron in that pool. In this manner, units within any particular pool are said to be in competition with each other. This is similar to some class situations in which the students are graded on a curved tennis match. The success of anyone comes at the expense of others. Right. Okay. That's that. Intuitive generalizations. They're not going to say innate or fitra that Allah has given us. We need these terminologies to throw people off. Right. So the model is not applied to any quantitative data, but lesioning the model supports the view that frontal behavior results from an impairment in the reward network, now associated with BG dysfunction. BG dysfunction. Basal ganglia. Okay, interesting. I was reading about basal ganglia earlier. I was actually reading about decision making here in Radish's book. Excuse me. Alhamdulillah. So if you go to page 53, states that procedural system includes the basal ganglia, particularly dorsal lateral basal ganglia circuits, starting with caudate, nucleus, and putamen, which receive inputs from the cortex. These synaptic connections between cortical circuits, which are believed to represent information about the world, are trained up by dopamine signals. So a lot of this is impaired, and I spoke about dopamine earlier as well. So the model is not applied to right. Next is another model by Rugier and O'Reilly. Okay, slightly older model, but a model of prefrontal cortex function that learns tasks appropriate for context representations. Stimulus encoding triggers the activation of output units via hidden units. Hidden units are biased by reciprocal connections with PFC units. PFC units are modulated by an adaptive critic AC unit. Okay, so these are some new terminologies, even for myself, which I'm just going to very quickly take note of here. Right. So, model of PFC learns task appropriate context. Okay, task input is here. Stimulus encoding triggers activation of output units via hidden units. That's what, again, McLeland and Rumelhart. I'll very quickly show you the paper that I covered a few weeks ago on YouTube and TikTok, which is the sorry. Mm, It was in the book. Right, okay. I have the book right here. Just bring it up. I have the book right here. Second. Right. So it's here. This one here. So this is where the hidden network is mentioned, okay? So I will pull it up here. It's on page 81, and this is by Koslin and Rukel. Pardon me. So this is the work that we're looking at. As you can see, you have the input, hidden layer, output layer. So this is essentially recognizing this object and how each square within this represents different sequences or shape discriminatory shapes and location and so on and so forth. So it's a computational way of trying to explain how a rule is taken out in this PowerPoint. This is simply about object recognition location, right? As the chapter states, identifying objects in different locations. So again, you're not just looking at rules, you're also looking at the location of each detail in the stimuli. So, so that's the hidden units are biased by reciprocal connections by the PFC, so they're working in tandem in a sense. And then the PFC are modulated by adaptive units, the AC. So the AC is modulating or they're not mediating because as you can see, it's above it. It's not between the PFC and some other plane, not plane, sorry, other group of units. And then task input is held constant, i.e., not used. Right, so stimulus, hidden unit, task, prefrontal cortex, context, interchangeable, modulated by adaptive critic unit, AC, then you have the output. So, how did this model come about? I'm not entirely sure because this is the first time I'm coming across O'Reilly's work. So, inshallah, we will look at this in detail for sure. But modulation, modulation of adapt, adaptive critic AC unit. Is there mediator or modulator? And is there filters as well? Like cognitive filters. So these are questions that need to be addressed really. Right. So the Hebbian weight. Hebbian is so was it David or Donald Hebb who proposed that synapses bind together to form strong connections, right? So here we can see his equations, right? And so the model is developed with Liabra. Training the model. Contrastive Hebbian learning is employed where learning minimizes the difference between plus and minus phases. Pools of units employ K winner take all dynamics. K is a constant that is being employed here, right? So delta is change in the weight of the unit and where it's and it's sorry the unit and its weight and location equivalent of x y and then minus taking away y and that's and the result should be a positive weight. So that's weight change. Of course weight has to be positive, otherwise your model's not going to work. And for error driven learning using CHL Hebbian, again this is contrast to Hebbian learning. And so this is to detect errors. So now you have the initial weights minus the contrastive weights. So the other side, other possibility, which is subject to a soft weight bounding to keep within the O1 range. Error as per, I don't really understand this equation here because what is change in error here minus the weights. Okay, the two terms are then combined additively with typo here with a normalized mixing constant k have. Okay, so it seems that what is being said here is that all of this calculation concludes that a unit is a winner takes all dynamic. One unit has to be successful out of all of those units. Okay, so task switches are induced via a dynamic gating mechanism based on temporal difference reward prediction learning mechanism. Okay, so difference in time and the reward gained from that, which then predicts how for how long for how long you're going to learn it and when this new piece of information, pardon me, this new rule based, this fact based rule will work for. Okay, so if we quickly go back here, looking at this graph, you can see that the best performers are the ones who auto evaluate, meaning they're able to substantiate the rule and it's locked in their memory during the Wisconsin card sorting task. And it seems to agree with this that they're able to predict the next outcome based on that. Even when the rules are changed, it doesn't necessarily reduce the amount of time. So it took less trials, for example, the most ideal participants here. So if you look at graph A, the purple bar, least amount of trials to understand what the rule, what the paradigm was about. Graph number B, they performed really good on a single set of trials, basically no errors as well, which is interesting, and sequential trial of rules. So this was not measured because they already were very successful in the single, so they didn't have to do many more. I mean, it's waste of time and resources anyway. So the prefrontal cortex lends context representations for each rule. So each rule is being done in the PFC context here. The adaptive critic unit learns to expect reward and fires when reward is absent, destabilizing PFC PFC representations. So it seems that when a reward is not expected, the AC unit it's activated, it fires when a reward is absent. So this destabilizes PFC representations apparently. So as I discussed, your dopamine levels really allow you to give out the right output. That's why when it comes to decision making and attention and understanding rules, these things are to a large degree absent amongst those who are getting their information from TikTok and the mainstream media through the scum really controlled media. It's all brain rot or goy slop, right? And it's very difficult for them to pretty much follow this representation of how they think. Now, this is not, again, a fact. This is just a paradigm that works really well. Right, functioning of the model following an error. So what happens when an error occurs? Sequence of context activation within the prefrontal cortex layer during a task switch. Gray squares represent inactive units. Okay, white squares represent active units, and dark gray squares represent represents units with a negative bias category. Okay, so these dark gray squares here are negative bias units. White square, they're active units, and gray squares are inactive. So gray inactive, white active, and dark gray negative bias. So they get really upset and angry when there's no reward once they've done the job right. The stimuli were five-dimensional with three values per dimension. Each epoch consisted of 250 trials, so this was a big trial set. 50 trials with dimension 1 and then 50 trials with dimension 2. Stimuli generated randomly on each trial. Maximum error rate is 250. Minimum error rate is 5. 1 per switch. So 1 error per switch. Okay, interesting. So it seems here the errors seem to sharply drop around this mark once trials were setting in around the sort of 15 mark, it seems. 15 15 stimuli were shown, and the error rate you can see dropped dramatically. Initially, the model produces both random and preservative errors. Following this developmental period, the model produces mainly preservative errors. Right. So random error drops as well. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's natural that total error would occur. They're natural because it's something that paradigms not one's not used to these paradigms initially, at least. Once task Once each task has been learned, residual preservative errors occur at each task switch. Right. So now contrasting five model variants. Right. So there seems to be a sharp increase here. So prefrontal cortex, the full model. Null-gate, the full model without adaptive critic unit. No prefrontal cortex, the full model without the AC unit or PFC units, only weight-based. SRN, a standard simple recurrent network, memory but no gating. Okay, BP, a feed-forward network. This is quite interesting, actually. So again, simplest is that feed-forward network error. So there seems to be error as trials went on, so rules will keep changing. And I'm not sure how stable this data is, because if you see here, no gate and standard simple recurrent network, they also show a sharp increase in error level as the trials went on. Okay, interesting. Simulating frontal lesions. At epoch 49, 75% of units within the PFC layer were lesioned. So what that means is that they supposedly acted as if one had brain damage, frontal lobe damage, right? Almost all errors produced by this lesion were preservation. The architecture supports a simple win, stay, lose, shift type of rule. If positive feedback is received, continue with the current subtask. If negative feedback received, switch to another subtask. The hidden layer did not develop abstract dimension-based representation because it needs to produce a specific input-output mapping at the level of stimulus features. So the input-output mapping is essentially the filter that allows the next set of units in the layer to really analyze stimulus feature. Hmm. Specialized activation-based mechanisms supported by the prefrontal cortex and associated subcortical nervous system, basal ganglia circuitry, which we spoke about earlier from Reddish's book I showed. Quite an important thing, can support rapid task switching. Right, now this is open up a new box for myself. That box is now looking at basal ganglia and tasks, rapid task switching. Okay, so we're gonna look up basal ganglia and rapid task switching. We'll look at the research on this. Right. The model illustrates a gen oops. The model generally the model illustrates a general distinction between a posterior cortex and PFC representations that may have important implications for understanding the unique contributions that the prefrontal cortex makes in human cognition. So essentially, the prefrontal cortex, as you can tell here, once it's in a sense isolated, once it's not isolated, pardon me, it doesn't make a lot of errors as the trials go on. However, once it is isolated, it produces more a high level of errors, as in there's a big increase from here. Sharp decrease initially, but then there's an increase here. So that is a big deal actually, as you can see the closeness of these two. Right, Bishara, this is a different model that exists in the Wisconsin card switching test. So here the Bishop, I've read this paper, so I'm almost entirely familiar with the mathematics here. So here what's happening is that the task now involves parameters, number one, and number two, attentional shift, I believe, or cognitive shift, and decision sensitivity is center focus here. So yeah, participants maintain a set of attentional weights, AT, one per dimension, color, form, or number. They use these weights to choose whether to place each stimulus card, where to place each stimulus card, and they update their weights based on feedback following each trial. If attending to all dimensions equally on trial T. So each trial, so color, form, number. So it comes up to 0.9999 with 1% error overall. If attending only to the second dimension, so form on trial T, there's only one right answer, 1. So this is one of three possibilities. And then second dimension is this one. So there's a 1/3 chance of, now this is probabilities we're talking about here. There's a 1/3 chance of color, form, or number. And then if attending only to second dimension, right, i.e. form, then it's either one or nothing. That's how it works. For each trial, each card to be sorted, the model produces a probability distribution over the four possible responses. So this equation, I actually made some notes on this, which I will read in a second. See if I can pull it up here. Sure, 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 sure. right down here. Here. Okay, this is pretty bizarre. Why is it not coming up? Maybe maybe let me find it. It's definitely here. Saying no, that's not the file. That's not the file. Okay, it should be here now. God bless you. Jesus loves you and He wants you to be with Him. We will see Him in Jannah, inshallah. Okay, so attention weights. Let's just go back here for a second. Here, AT, the idea. Anyway, the attention weights, right? Attention weights. So your mental budget is a vector. So it's AT is equal to AT color, comma AT form, comma AT number, right? And each entry is how much attention you're giving to that rule of trial T, right? A is attention, T is trial. So all have equal attention. So first trial, initially 0.33, 0.33, 0.33. Next, real life example, you walk into a new game where you don't know the rules, so you initially consider all possibilities. So initially you consider all possibilities. Okay, so how the model is now being looked at. The match vector, which is here, this portion here, MTKI. So number one was the attention weights. Okay, that's number one. Number two is looking at how the model reads what you just did, so what your choice matched. So the match vector, what your choice matched. When you place a card onto one of the four piles, the placement matches a pile on some dimension, not others. They encode 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. So now it's binary. There's a binary situation going on here, right? So look at it this way. So you have M, T, K. So the match vector for trial and K constant is 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0 or 1, right? If your chosen pile matches a card by color only, then naturally it will be 1, 0, 0. So the paradigm, the choices we have is color, shape, color, form, number. Yeah, so it's color, form, and number. If, for example, match by form and number, so the match vector on trial T and the constant is shape and form, pardon me, form and number, so that's 0, 1, 1, 1. That's what we're looking at here. Okay, so after that, number 3 is turning feedback into a teaching signal. So now feedback signal, that is the ST, right? What the feedback suggests you should focus on. Okay, so this is key, as feedback is right or wrong. So feedback is essentially right, becomes a target direction for your attention. Becomes a target direction for your attention. If feedback is unambiguous and right, so if feedback is strictly one perspective, then you're looking at ST is MT over K. So the match vector in trial with constant. So that's your feedback, right? So that means focus on the dimension you match. If feedback is unambiguous and right, meaning focus on the dimension. Focus on the dimension you matched. So if feedback is unambiguous and wrong, so that would be your feedback and trial is 1 1 1 1 1, the color shape and form minus the directed decision vector of trial and whatever constant. So then constant is 1 0 1 0, so it'll be down to another 0 0 1 or 1 0 1 or 1 0 0. Sorry, no, 1 0 0 0 1 0 or 0 0 1. So if unambiguous and wrong, if unambiguous, so that would be again feedback of trial, which we just wrote. So meaning focus on the dimension you did not match because the match one must be wrong. Focus on the dimensions you did not match. You're learning which light switch controls which lamp. You flip switch A and lamp 1 turns on. Unambiguous right, it's that switch. You flip switch A and lamp does not turn on. Unambiguous wrong, not that switch. Try others. Okay, so the match one is wrong, 1 1 1 1 1. And if the match is correct, unambiguous, it's unambiguous. So that would be, yeah, as I say, 1 0 0 or 0 1 0 1 1. So if form and number is what to be considered. Okay, right. So moving forward from here to, to look at this equation, yeah. So I need to go through this actually. I think what I'll do is just thinking, how do I go about this? Sod Cooper, Shelley's and got to go through here. Right, so what we will do is continue from We'll continue on how fast attention updates. So the big update from right. Okay. So so yeah. So what we'll do is follow this tomorrow, break down this equation, inshallah, and yeah, work from there. Till then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربي زدني علما ربي زدني علما ربي زدني علما